we build thriving organizations and communities when we are so driven to divide rather than to connect across our differences? I recently did a little experiment. I was running a workshop, and I asked participants to read 2 statements and go to one side of the room or the other, depending on which one they believed. The first couple were pretty tame. Coffee versus tea, cats versus dogs. Actually, people have very strong opinions about that second one. I thought I was going to have to break up a brawl between the Pomeranian and the Persian crew. The third one was different. Athletes should have the right to kneel during the national anthem. Athletes should stand and salute the flag. Silence. As people moved to their sides, they looked out of the corner of their eyes at folks who just a moment ago were their colleagues, their friends. Now no one knew what to think about one another. We're so hardwired to engage in this us versus them thinking when we disagree, especially when those disagreements are rooted in our core values and beliefs. We become so entrenched in our side, our view of what's right, that we lose our willingness to seek out different perspectives. What does it take for us to walk out onto that bridge of our differences, to find common ground with people who think, believe, behave differently than we do? We know that diversity yields better results. Diverse teams outperform their peers in terms of financial performance, complex problem solving, employee engagement, innovation. And it's not just about bringing different people together. The most successful teams practice inclusion, where everybody feels equally valued and respected. And yet so often, we find that diversity and inclusion efforts fall flat. They either lose momentum, some remain fairly superficial from the beginning. I think there's a missing link, one which requires a deeper level of individual reflection, courage, and some discomfort. We need to practice expansion. I define expansion as creating community across the boundary of our differences, leaving the safety and comfort of our us group, our tribe, and actually seeking out, not just accepting and tolerating, but looking for the perspectives of people who are often on the periphery of our social network. Expansion requires us to sometimes challenge our own ideologies and beliefs. And our human brains do not like to do that. We tend to be rooted in situations where we find safety. And anytime we experience any sort of threat, whether it's a threat to our physical or emotional well-being or even our values, we tend to shy away from that. When we feel attacked, judged, confused, we want to go back to our side, to people who think like us. And not only do we convince ourselves that we're right over on this side, we are righteous. We are the truth tellers. And all those people over there, they're not just wrong. They're imbeciles. They're stupid. They're dangerous. This may sound like hyperbole, but the Pew Research Center recently found that people representing both sides of the political spectrum increasingly look at each other as not only closed-minded, but unintelligent, even immoral. It's just too easy for us to dehumanize one another across our differences. I've had the opportunity to facilitate workshops and dialogues on diversity, identity, with a lot of different people. And what I've come to find is that across industries, across cultures, there are 3 universal practices that can help us engage in expansion, help us walk out across that bridge of our differences. Number 1, embrace multiple realities. Our perception of the truth is not necessarily the whole truth. It may only be one side of the story. In September 2019, The America in One Room experiment brought over 500 people together, representing the diversity that exists in our country. And these folks spent 4 days being asked to talk about the most controversial issues we face in our country: climate change, immigration, healthcare, taxes. Not your typical small talk among strangers. And it was the first time for many of these folks that they had ever been asked to have these conversations with people who represented the other side. What happened next amazed both the researchers and the participants as folks came together and just talked and listened to one another. They didn't discuss these issues the way that the policy wonks, talking heads on TV do. They shared their stories. They made themselves vulnerable with one another. And in doing so, they actually softened their views of each other. They still disagreed, but they didn't dehumanize each other. In fact, many became friends. By the end of the experiment, 95% agreed, I learned a lot about people very different from me, about what they and their lives are like. When we embrace multiple realities, we acknowledge that all of us are looking at the same issues through the lens of our own individual beliefs and experiences. Which takes me to number 2, perspective taking. We have to walk out all the way across that bridge and experience the world through the minds and hearts of people we often perceive as the other. Jamil Zaki, in The War for Kindness, says, when you empathize with other people, you take on their emotions, decode their thoughts, and worry about their welfare. Now think about that for a moment. Not just seeing things from another person's perspective, but caring deeply about the needs and well-being of people with whom we fundamentally disagree. Easier said than done, especially because we all tend to be the narrators of our own stories of hardship. And sometimes we try to one-up each other on the situations when we feel we've been in the one-down position. My pain is greater than their pain. You think you've got it so bad. You haven't heard my story yet. In truth, all of us have automatic advantages and disadvantages because of some aspect of our identity. Our stories of pain do not preclude us from having privilege. As a woman, I'm very well aware of the times my voice has been diminished because of my gender. I know what it's like to be in the one-down position, yet I also have advantages because of my race, my economic status, my physical and mental ability. When I am with people who have had to take the perspective of the majority population, the population in power, their entire lives for some aspect of their identity for which I have power, I need to step back and listen. My story of hardship should not overshadow theirs because their voices have been silenced long enough. Equally important, we need to find the balance between empathy and accountability. James Baldwin said, "We can disagree with one another and still love each other, unless your disagreement is rooted in my oppression and denial of my right to exist." Perspective taking must coexist with us challenging beliefs and ideologies that contribute to systematized oppression. We can still recognize that the people who hold those ideologies are human beings. They have stories too. And that doesn't mean that we excuse behaviors that lead to inequality or injustice. So, how do we practice compassion and curiosity when we are so compelled to judge, to blame, to what about? Brings me to my third point. Emotional ownership. I define emotional ownership as bringing all those emotions we have out onto the bridge across our differences with us, and inviting others to do the same. Because our identities and the stories around them are filled with emotions of pride, of anger, of grief. We have to acknowledge how our emotions are driving our perspectives of the situation. And we have to manage our emotions so they don't cloud our ability to take the perspective of others. I have two wonderful coaches when it comes to emotional ownership. They live in my house with me, my two daughters. The public elementary school they attend has a peace program. They're learning from the age of 4 how the brain functions. They're learning emotional control, conflict resolution, mindfulness practices. And they are more than willing to educate me when I mess up. Case in point, I recently got in an argument with my youngest daughter, Lily. She's 4 and an incredibly picky eater. I made her a grilled cheese sandwich because it's her favorite, kind of anticipating I was going to get some mom points for it. She flatly refused to eat. As my anger and impatience grew, so did her resolve not to touch a bite. And the look of triumph on her face, knowing that she was winning this battle, ooh, that made me angry. Until even though she's the 4-year-old, I was the one having the temper tantrum. My oldest daughter, Rosie, came up to me and she said, Mommy, you're having an emotional hijacking right now. Let's take some deep breaths together, Mommy. She continued. Now, what's happening is that Amy, the amygdala who lives inside your brain, she's pushing you up the conflict escalator. We need to make Amy go to sleep, and we need to wake up your prefrontal cortex. She lives up here, and we're gonna have her come down the conflict escalator so you can work this out with Lily. At this moment, I realized I was getting a neuroscience lesson from a 6-year-old. So I said, okay, well, teach me, how do I walk down the conflict escalator, Rosie? She said, why don't you tell Lily how you're feeling and ask her how she's feeling? Emotional ownership. So I said, okay, Lily, I am angry right now because you won't eat your grilled cheese sandwich that I made you. And I'm confused because I thought this was your favorite, so can you help me understand? To which my daughter replied, I do like grilled cheese, Mommy, but you didn't ask me what I wanted, and that's not fair. Amy, the amygdala inside my head, wanted to say, life's not fair, kid. If you have so many ideas about the kind of food you want to eat, make your own meals from now on. But I paused. I thought about the emotions we were both bringing. It wasn't about a grilled cheese sandwich. I was frustrated because, yes, as her parent, I want her to eat her food and be healthy, but I also wanted to be acknowledged for doing something nice, and quite frankly, as her mom, I wanted her to do what I told her to do. And as a child, I realized her whole life is dominated by adults telling her what to do. She was looking for some autonomy, even if it was just in the meal she ate. Think about how often all of us walk up that conflict escalator in our professional and our personal lives when we don't acknowledge how our emotions are driving our stories, or we invalidate the emotions others are bringing. Let's go back to that question of whether athletes should stand or kneel during the national anthem. For this round, I invited the participants to practice the 3 steps to expansion. Embrace multiple realities rather than arguing why you're right and they're wrong. Take the perspective of the other people. Practice curiosity and compassion. And finally, own your emotions. An older white man stepped forward. And he said, I'm a veteran, and I served in active combat. I saw my friends die. To me, standing and saluting the flag is an act of patriotism to honor those who have given the ultimate sacrifice. And when I see those players kneel, I'm angry. Because all I can see inside my head is my friends and their families who have given everything for our freedom. An African-American woman on the other side of the room stepped forward. She said to him, "I can relate to what you're saying. I'm a veteran too. I served in active combat, and I lost friends. I have also lost members of my community to racially driven violence. Since my little boy was a child, I have had to educate him on how to behave if he is ever approached by law enforcement, so that hopefully we could lessen the risk of him being unjustly punished or killed for doing nothing. So when I see those players kneel, to raise awareness to the inequality that exists for people who look like me, that to me is the ultimate act of patriotism." These two veterans, a white man and a black woman, as they told their stories, they walked closer to the line that divided them. They didn't cross over. They didn't drastically change their social views. But in that moment, they sought connection with each other. And they saw and heard one another for the full human story that each one brought. And in that moment, an entire room of people took a breath together and acknowledged these two as individuals rather than ideologies. My challenge to you: practice expansion. Walk out on the bridge even when it is uncomfortable, even when it is painful, even when there's no guarantee the other side is going to come and meet you halfway. Our human instinct for us versus them is powerful. But I think equally, if not more potent, is our ability to seek connection, to honor one another's humanity. Thank you.